You're listening to the Our Erie podcast with Marty Nwachukwu,
Lydia, Laythe,
and Davona Pacley.
This series will bring citizens, entrepreneurs, activists, politicians, artists, and thought leaders to the table for a frank discussion around societal issues facing our post-industrial city and the United States at large. Take a seat.
We've been dealing with the stress of the election in a lot of different ways. So I think it goes without saying that like this election has been historic and unprecedented in so many different ways. And we're really having to deal with a lot of issues coming to a head, whether they are political, like systemic issues in campaign policy and in how we elect people, or if it's in systemic issues like we've talked about already, like racism and sexism and those kind of bigger issues. But I feel like this, for me at least, it's like this almost overwhelming cross section of all these different issues that are so much bigger than me coming to a point and trying to figure out, okay, what can I handle? What can't I handle? And how do I fit into this like bigger puzzle in like a meaningful way where I can make a difference, but also not like hurt myself in the process. How are you guys feeling?
Facts, because that's where, I mean, just as far as protests and whatnot, the whole last couple months with protests going on, I really didn't feel called to go personally, just because I felt like when I do protests, I feel like I'm like, okay, I want to do more though. Like, I know that they're obviously, collective, having more people, it creates more voice and more power. I do understand that part, but I think I'm in a different space in life where I'm like, okay, I'm out here, but what can we do to make some change that would be on the end of, we're taking this protest power, we're taking the power of the people, and we're going to implement it in this way. That's kind of where I'm at. I was like, okay, what's the implementation that I can do? What is it that I can do to kind of like take this fire and this passion? That's just myself as in general. Like, I'm like that type. I'm like, let me take the passion, the fire of people and figure out how I can spit that out in a different way. Mm-hmm. And for me, in a more creative way. So that's kind of like why I did not, because I felt a lot of guilt around protest. And around like, okay, well, if you say you're a person who's about the community, that's being real honest. If you say your person's about the community, about wanting to create change, then why are you not going down to these protests? Why are you not putting yourself out there? Your body's out there, your body out there. And I think for me, I'm going to go and listen to that ancestor, be like, listen, sis, we done did that part. Now you need to be safe. And so you can do things in your way. And I think that's just how I looked at it that's what I looked at. And that's how I did it for myself. And on top of that, COVID was also happening. You know what I'm saying? But for sure. I mean, I get it. That's a whole different thing. I know people are like, well, then you can't be fearful. No, I was being cautious. There's a difference, So I think for me, I looked at it. That's just what I've kind of looked at for myself around protesting.
How about you, Marty?
For me, as terrible as this year has been for all of us, I feel like this year has displayed all the different ways that it means to be a citizen. Between this big, really important historical election happening, and then from June until now in a lot of cities that are bigger than us, protests that have been going on around police brutality and police accountability, as well as beyond being in the streets, the actions that people have taken by showing up to City Hall, and showing up to some of these police, if they have them, police review boards or police reviewing bodies, and writing letters and making calls and calling senators, and some places actually instituting change. So like between being in the street and lobbying legislators to make actual change, and then this week watching a national election where like, it shows like where people are. This whole year of 2020 has showed us like what it means to be a citizen. And as much as I want every single person to vote, it's also shown us there's so many different ways you can participate. Absolutely. And voting is not the only way to do it. And it was long and tiring, and it's not over. It's never over. But I am really happy for at least, this presidential race to be at an end at this point. So those of us, who are always focused on the local work and the institutional work can go back to that in a deeper way than that we have been in these last few months, and to work and bring more people into that. Because, whether it's because of the protest or these national elections, more people are paying attention. So this is an opportunity for us right now to bring more people in and create more change. So I'm happy for that and tired. And we need to have a conversation about resting. Because like with you, Davona, I was with you. I love a march, actually. I love to be out. Yes. But as an immune compromised person in June when this was first happening, and the numbers in Erie weren't as bad as they are currently this week of November 3rd, but I didn't feel safe to be out in the streets, and I felt that was my prerogative not to be in the street. Right. And I was actively doing other things to help the movement. So absolutely, I don't feel like you need to feel guilty for not marching.
No, absolutely not. And there is a very real life-threatening force, whether it's COVID or police brutality. There are very real reasons for you to be afraid to go participate in these things. And so there should be absolutely no guilt, that you are totally justified. And I think that you hit it right on the head as far as what are we okay with? Where are our strengths best suited, and where do we feel safest? And not that we can't be pushed outside our comfort zone, but also where can we protect ourselves? Because at the end of the day, if you don't have something to work for, then why are you doing any of it? So for myself, early in the summer, my stepson Benji was in town, and so I was spending all my free time with him, and I wasn't gonna go put myself in danger or put myself at risk of contracting COVID while I had him here, because at the end of the day, I'm doing this for him and I'm doing it for my family. But he is a young biracial little boy who will grow up and potentially someday be affected by police brutality or systemic racism or racial profiling, and if one summer he has his hood up, that could be the difference between life and death for him. So this is so if I can't also see that my time with him is so important and he's the reason why I'm doing this, right, and balance that with the need to be active and doing it, then what's the point if I'm just always out there doing something and not embracing this is the reason why.
You better say it.
And this work will burn you out fast. And that's why I felt in the summer that, before this, I've been at marches, I've been at rallies, I'm doing film things, I'm doing that. And this is a time for a lot of new voices and faces stepped up in Erie that I'm really proud of. I'm like, you know what? Let them take this shine and take this forward. This is not my moment right now. Let that be them. Yes. So we all need to recognize when we need to take care of ourselves, and also recognize when people are stepping up and let them shine and step up.
And when they're capable of carrying that torch for a while, and when I can rejoin them later or help inform their action as well. But yeah, I think you're totally right that there are plenty of people capable of this, and we need to be identifying and encouraging them to also join and lead. Because I think so many people are oh, I'll join. I experienced this with the walk in Edinburgh. They're oh, I would never organize this myself, but I'll come and I'll join the walk, and I'll walk with you, which great. But I'm sure there are countless people that joined in the walk that could easily have led it. And it felt no one was going to if I didn't. And that's not a place that we should be at. There should be a network of people where we know if I don't do this, someone else will. We all are in this together. Yeah. Well, and I think too, it reminds me of conversations I've had with people about the purpose of protest too. Because I think some people, if they don't have an education or awareness around how certain political systems work, they think that the protest is going to create the change. They think, oh, if we yell loud enough outside here in Perry Square, the elected official will see it and they'll change their mind. Right. And that absolutely, I would say 99% of the time is not how it works. If anything, it makes people dig their heels in more. If you go into a protest thinking this is going to change that elected official's mind that I'm yelling at, that's not right. Right. It's not how it works.
Protest, depending on the situation. This summer was a different situation, but protests, if you're working on a campaign to change an issue, is the last resort. Say you want to, zone a certain part of the city to be affordable housing. So you get your coalition of people together and we say, we're going to rally together and get affordable housing. So then you write up the legislation you want for affordable housing, and then you go to your legislators and you get 3 of them on your side, but there's 3 more who aren't on your side, and then 1 of them flips or something to that effect. You keep calling, you keep on meeting, you keep calling, you keep on meeting, and then you move one, but you don't move one. The protest comes when you have hit a wall. There's nowhere else to go. So you need to bring the public and the news and the media in there to put public pressure. That's when the protest really puts pressure on people.
Absolutely.
But with the situation in June with the police brutality, it served as a way of creating awareness in the community. It served as a way of creating accountability. We're in your face in front of, City Hall. What are you going to do about it? There's different reasons for protesting, but don't expect protesting to be the thing that changes it. There's work that has to go with it.
So much. Yeah. There's so much going on behind the scenes that I think people don't realize, especially people that aren't involved even in the protests themselves, right? Like I remember so many times when we would do different actions outside of like Mike Kelly's office or something, where people would be like, oh, go get a job or something, because they think that we were like protesting, like, but they didn't realize that like behind this were people's jobs, like community organizers that are actually doing this as their job, and who like there's so much work going on behind the scenes that this is just the one visible thing. But I think visibility is so important, and that like for myself, like in Edinburgh, like the march for me was a lot more about visibility and creating more awareness, because what I saw was silence, where conversations weren't happening, where people were saying this doesn't happen here. And I said, okay, if it doesn't happen here, then let's just make sure we're clear and we're saying to people, this won't happen here. We're not going to let this happen here. That so people know, I see so many different students coming to campus that don't look like me, that aren't white, that aren't blonde hair, blue eyed, that come to campus, and who knows what they think when they walk on campus and they see all these rural folks. Do they just assume that this isn't going to happen here? Or do they look at us and think, I don't know where they stand. I don't know if they would come to my defense. I don't know if they assume all the worst about me just because of how I look.
Right. And I think that add to that, that's very like one-dimensional to look at things, because I think when you look at somebody and you see them with a sign outside on a sidewalk protesting against whatever, a corporation, whatever, I think that people automatically, like you said, people automatically assume, well, they don't have a job, or they don't this, they don't that. It's like you're looking at one thing and you're not even thinking, well, does this person, like, you're not thinking about all the other attributes or things into this situation. So that's very one-dimensional though. But looking at protests, it's not a one-dimensional thing. That protest also help people who are working in public spaces. It helps organizers. It all is something that is very cyclical, that works together. And so without one wouldn't work without the other. And I think there's beauty that we saw this whole entire year in 2020. We saw all different types of systems work in a way where not systems work. We saw all different types of different, I guess, diverse forms of protest. Because protest doesn't just look like picket signs outside. It looks, that's different. Protests look like so many different things. But I think that's just, I'm trying to get my mind like thinking around the fact that everything works together. It doesn't work separate. So I don't know. Does that, like, it makes sense.
Like in Erie, there were marches, but then for a few weeks, they were kneeling in front of the courthouse silently as a way of, not the courthouse, City Hall as a way of protest, different ways to do it.
That's true.
But protest also can serve, like if you have an ally somewhere on a certain government body and they're the only voice speaking up for change, when the community comes out and says, we agree that this needs to change, it gives them more power to push the needle in that body of government already said.
Right.
For sure. Yeah, there's so many powerful tools that we can be using. And yeah, I think to just go back to it, like whether it's protesting or having meetings with elected officials, because you can do well in one-on-one conversations, or whether it's creating space for these conversations to have. And like we talked about, creating spaces for people to gather, like a coffee shop or like a co-working space, right? That like creating space is also creating space for people can be a pretty rebellious or revolutionary act in and of itself, right? The fact that we have a space, the fact that we have a podcast that we can talk to and talk within about these issues is pretty revolutionary in some aspects
Absolutely.
as well, you know. And I think that all of this, you know, wherever people feel they can, I think we all have a role to play. And like you were just saying, Davona, like it all helps. It all helps. It all helps shift the needle towards progress, towards growth, towards a more inclusive, diverse, loving community. But we just have to be committed to doing that and not giving up, and taking breaks when we need it, and resting when we need it, and protecting ourselves when we need it, but that like never giving up.
Yes.
But when protesting and lobbying and writing letters and public pressure don't work, we got to get some people out of office. And that's what we came together nationally to do this week. So how are y'all feeling about, you know, the big election? You've been listening to the Our Erie podcast, the voice of reason in the fog of post-industrial America. Next week, our guest will be Kristy Gnibus, Democratic candidate for Pennsylvania's 16th Congressional District, to break down her national campaign experience. Continue the conversation on Facebook/Our Erie Series. This podcast is produced by John C. Lyons, Marty Nwachukwu, Davona, Pacley, and Lydia Laythe. Funding provided by Erie Arts and Culture. Music by Corey Cook. We appreciate you for listening to Our Erie podcast. Peace.